What a terrific year it's been for Lake Highland, and it's been a great year for me to learn, to listen to what has made Lake Highland great, and just to witness all of the wonderful things that are going on. There's so much to be proud of here. Lacrosse competed for the state championship this weekend, and it was just amazing what they did. Archery, national champions for a third time in a row. You can go in many places in this country, many of the great schools across the country, and ask them about debate or wrestling, and they'll have to mention Lake Highland if they're discussing what's going on in the world of debate or wrestling because of the phenomenal performance of our students there. We have students that are individually excelling in so many different things, and in the classroom, on the field, in the pool, just doing amazing things. And I'm so proud of them and of you and what you have done to raise these wonderful kids. Give yourselves a round of applause. As you know, when I came, I started what I called a listening tour so that I could actually begin to learn a little bit more about what makes Lake Highland great. Because I was convinced when I got here, and I'm more convinced of it now, that you don't know what makes Lake Highland great. Because you've been doing Lake Highland so long, it just seems natural to you. The air that you breathe, the oxygen that gives life to the faculty and staff on a daily basis, just seem to be permeating in this atmosphere that we call an atmosphere of love, concern, and mutual respect. And that's a wonderful thing because it seems to come so natural to so many at Lake Highland. But for those of us who are entering Lake Highland, and so for people who just kind of come into Lake Highland for a short period of time, Ann Mills hears this all the time from prospective families, it truly is an exceptional place. And it's hard when you've been here for a while to take stock of what an exceptional place it is. The other thing that is difficult to do is to make explicit those things which make it exceptional. And so as families graduate, as longtime staff and faculty members begin to retire, one of the duties of those of us who are fortunate enough to inherit and be stewards of this legacy is to listen carefully and to make explicit those things which have made Lake Highland so special. Because it will be up to us to intentionally and purposefully continue that legacy forward, continue that tradition. The other thing that's difficult to do when things are just naturally excellent is for us to think that perhaps we don't need to be thinking about what needs to be different or what needs to change. And maybe even if we do think about the things that need to be different or the things that need to change, we are cautious because we don't want to accidentally mess up something that doesn't need to be changed. And so when I see Lake Highland, and I use this image at some of the coffees, I see it like a Jenga puzzle. But it's a Jenga puzzle made of crystal. And we have to be careful that as we touch each of the blocks that make Lake Highland special, that we don't unravel all of the things that make Lake Highland more than the sum of its parts. But one thing I think that's true is that we can't rest where we are. And I want to use that expression, can't rest where we are, in two senses of the term. One is, if we rest where we are, the world, the educational world, will pass us by. If we continue to be the very best school that we've become today, based on what we knew yesterday, we will not be able to anticipate the needs of tomorrow. And so it's important that we brace ourselves for a journey of experimenting with what we believe we need to do to translate all that is so wonderful about Lake Highland into the future. I use the term "we can't rest on the excellence that we know" in a second way too, and that is I have had the privilege of getting to know you over the course of the last year, and I know your DNA. I know your children's DNA. I know how you're wired. I know how the faculty and staff wired. You are constitutionally incapable of resting anywhere at any level. You are always driving and pushing for more, for better, and for what is best for our kids. And so it's that drive that I want to tap into as today we take stock of where Lake Highland is and begin to think carefully about where Lake Highland is going to go. After my year of listening and my year of learning about pre-K through 12 education, and I've learned a lot, the one phrase that keeps coming back to me about where Lake Highland is, and perhaps if we have to have that line about what the state of the school is, I would say that the state of the school is ready to grow. That we're ready to grow in multiple dimensions. And I don't mean growth in size, although we're doing tremendous on enrollment right now. We've got 96% retention on our contracts for next year, which is phenomenal. Give yourselves a round of applause. And we have a number of new contracts, and we're having to say no to some very qualified students who are interested in coming to Lake Highland, and we still have the opportunities for others to come in, but it's not size that we need to be focused on. When I say we're ready to grow, I think that is really taking stock of where we are and how much better we can be. One of the ways that I would describe what Lake Highland has done so well over the course of its almost 50-year history is it's done more than simply provide an educational product that you as families consume and purchase. What Lake Highland has done is provide meaningful and memorable educational experiences for your students. And you can tell me specific stories about the relationships that they've developed with other students, about the things that they've tried that they didn't know that they could do, about the times that they failed and somebody picked them up and dusted them off and helped them on to the next effort. You have told me the stories about the memorable educational experiences that your students have had. And you've also told me stories about how your lives and your children's lives have been changed because of those memorable experiences. We had the pleasure of hosting at our house the other day 56 charter members. Students who started here in pre-K and K and are about to graduate from Lake Highland. As one student put it, as he looked around at the crowd in our yard, he said, "That's a lot of tuition." And it is, thank you. But when you think about the transformational experiences that they had at Lake Highland from pre-K all the way up to graduation, when Judy Walker can walk over to a senior and show them pictures of what they were doing in her class, that's transformation. It requires that type of personal investment, that type of understanding of where our sons and daughters are and where they can be, to guide them step by step by step into their full potential. And so when I think about the frontier for Lake Highland, I think that it is about moving from providing memorable and meaningful experiences to being very intentional and purposeful about guiding transformations. That we need to think about in explicit and measurable ways the types of changes that we want to see from our sons and daughters. And those types of changes probably need to be calibrated down to the individual level. And at a place like Lake Highland, when you have the relationships between the faculty and the students that we do, and the counseling staff and the students that we do, I believe that we can actually customize transformational learning experiences for each of our students. We need to think about this individually, and we need to think about this institutionally. And that requires us to give some thought as to how do we begin by keeping the end in mind. So what is it that we are trying to do to prepare our students for the world that they will have to learn to live, love, and lead in? And it's very difficult for us, if not impossible, to anticipate what that world will be like. The students who are graduating this year, some of you heard me say this at the coffees, when they entered Lake Highland, there was no such thing as the iPhone. Think about how that single device, that one innovation, that one intervention has changed what it means to be an adolescent today, to be a preteen today. Think about what it's going to mean in college and beyond. The access that they have to information and to social media has revolutionized so much of their lives. But it's not the iPhone we need to catch up to. It's the next thing we need to anticipate. And because we can't specifically imagine what that's going to be, we have to develop in our sons and daughters the capacities to understand whatever challenges and opportunities come their way, and to be able to solve the problems that we could not have anticipated or prepared them for. The good news is we've solved problems before too, right? And we have to quit thinking about teaching them to solve the problems that we know how to solve and mine our own imaginations for what it takes to help them learn how to solve whatever problems come their way. Because the problems we solve probably couldn't have been anticipated by our parents or our teachers either, but somebody gave us the capacities and the dispositions that we needed in order to be able to solve those problems. And so the things that I think that we need to do, based on what I've heard from you over the course of the last year, and I've heard from our faculty over the course of the last year, and our staff, and our alumni, are these. And they break down into categories that spell out the word guide for two reasons. One is because I believe that what we have to do as educators and parents is to work together to guide transformations for our students. The second reason is it's going to help me remember how to get through all of them. So the first letter is G. I believe that we need to continue to work hard to globalize the learning experiences for our students. Coming from the higher ed world, I know how to do that in college, okay? I know how to get a 20-year-old overseas. I don't know how to do it so well for a 10-year-old. And so we need to think together what it means to anticipate the fact that our students will be growing up and living in a world that is increasingly interconnected, both by transportation, by communication, and by migration. We have got to help them understand how to encounter the cultural differences in this world, engaging people who might put together right and wrong in a fundamentally different way than we thought right and wrong should be put together, and still finding a civil and peaceful way to resolve the natural differences that would arise as a result of that. We have got to help our students live up to and into a globalized world. I'm pleased to report that we've taken some steps this year, some of them recovered from past years' practices, that have begun to put us down that road. One is we brought back the Humanities Abroad experiences, both at spring break and in the summer, and we intend to keep that going for the foreseeable future. The other thing that we're looking at is something that was initiated a few years ago called Foreign Language in Elementary School, and looking at the need to interject more foreign language at a younger age and continuing that all the way through their experience here at Lake Highland. One of the things that you as educational institutions are being called on the carpet for and should be called on the carpet for is that we're only graduating people who are really fluent in one language. And luckily, for now, it's the language that can help you get around in most of the world. That may not always be the case, and even if it's not, there are large portions of the world who cannot converse or conduct commerce in English. The other piece of that is any of you who've studied a foreign language, and many of you may actually be functioning with English as your second language, know that by learning a language, you're able to take yourself out of your own cultural perspectives and put yourself in another cultural perspective. And when you visit a place that you're not familiar and you don't have the cultural resources available to you, that's when you know you have a perspective and that you need to be able to understand other people's perspectives as well. So I want us to work together over the course of the coming years to discover what it means to globalize the educational experience here. The second thing that I want us to work on is unleashing the creative potential of our students and our teachers. Unleashing the creative potential of our students and our teachers. I remain convinced that the greatest asset that Lake Highland has is its people. We are a family, and the people here and the relationships that we've developed over time have made Lake Highland great. We need to continue to develop those resources for the school and for our students. One of the things that one step that we're taking this year is we're about to launch a search for a senior level human resources organizational development professional to help us take stock of what has made our teachers and our staff so great, and to help us continue to grow those professionals in their own development, help us to capture what they've done so well on paper and be explicit and intentional about replacing them as they retire with folks who are just as good, and to help those teachers have an intentional path of professional growth and development as we're trying to anticipate what changes in education we will be seeing. The second piece is to unleash our students. Our students are driven. They want to please you. They want to please me. They want to please, most of all, their teachers, and they don't want to disappoint them. But we have continued a tradition in education in the United States of what I call a factory model. And we are preparing students for a robust industrial revolution in the 19th century in the way that we structure our days. We're moving kids from one place to the next in lockstep, and it could easily be the yabba dabba doo whistle that changes classes, but it's a bell that changes classes. And our teachers are locked also in that same time frame. Our teachers don't have the time to communicate and collaborate with one another. They're simply teaching AP economics, 9 periods, okay? And when they have their planning period, it's to talk to the student whose only time is to come during the planning period to talk to that teacher. And so our teachers and our students are locked into a schedule that I think that we need to look at more creatively. And I'm sensing energy from the faculty and our directors about looking at that with appropriate priority being placed on academic excellence and making sure that we don't compromise that in the process. Related to that is the amount of time our students are spending outside of the classroom on co-curricular activities and homework. Our biggest constraint at Lake Highland is the clock, okay? There are only 24 hours in a day. There's nothing that any of us can do to change the 24-hour clock. And we have driven, ambitious students who want to perform at the highest level. We have driven, ambitious parents who want our students to perform at the highest level. And we have driven, ambitious faculty who want to make sure that your students perform at the highest level. But it's up to us as the adults in the room to make sure that we're preparing these students not only for college, but for life, and to make sure that their lives are healthy and balanced. We did the Day in the Life of the Highlander survey. We also followed that up with an institutional health check with our upper school students and got back some interesting data. The Day in the Life of the Highlander data I would cast as anecdotal. It's not a scientific survey, but it does give us some feedback. But our parents and our students alike are both reporting lack of sleep, okay? Our parents and our students alike are both reporting lack of sleep. About 70% of our upper school students are getting less than 8 hours of sleep. Most of our upper school students are getting less than 7 hours of sleep, okay? And so that's something that we know is not a healthy formula for success. Most of our upper school students and most of our parents of upper school students are reporting at least 2 hours or more per night of homework, okay? The one place where there's a disconnect, the students are reporting at a greater rate more than 2 hours of co-curricular activity on a daily basis, and the parents are only reporting that at a much more modest rate, okay? So our students are aware both of co-curricular pressures and curricular pressures. Some of you are commuting great distances to get here, and so you start throwing in the commute, the homework, the co-curricular expectations, the regular class day, the sleep, and oh, by the way, did you want to eat something besides Chick-fil-A for dinner tonight? We're smart enough. We're smart enough to figure out how to preserve the academic excellence and expectations that we have for our students and our academic program here, and to help them live balanced lives. One of the things that we're doing here is to try to open up our backyard. We want our students, when they have downtime, to experience downtime. They might be here waiting for practice and not be able to go home to your backyard, so we want them to be able to enjoy the backyard here. So Reverend Sims has put ping pong tables and foosball tables in the backyard, and just a week or two ago, we actually opened up the lake to all of our science classes and had the Boy Scouts, thank you Boy Scouts, kayaks out on the lake, and the students had a blast. And we're trying to find some ways to have safe, supervised, fun recreation and outdoor learning experiences so that our kids can play and play in nature and engage the nature that's around them right here. And so we want to help unleash their whole person as they continue to grow up and get prepared for life. We also need to be thinking about innovating transformational teaching and learning experiences. We need to be thinking about innovating transformational teaching and learning experiences. One of the great things about education is we always know what works. We don't always know what also might work. And we have to begin thinking and experimenting with new ways of teaching and learning. particularly as we want to model for our students what I call design thinking through, and it's not my term, it's other people's term, design thinking, through what we know to be a great way of investing in our students the capacities that they're going to need in the future, and that is to be good problem solvers. And to shift the curriculum around where it's more project-based, where students are actually looking at problems together and deploying the resources that they've learned in their content classes to actually continue to solve problems together and begin to innovate solutions. We've done some things this year that reinforce that in robotics, the Innovation Institute in the middle school, and in the iLab, and have had some great successes. Those are just glimpses. I want you to look past the shiny, cool robotic stuff and the high-tech stuff and look at the pedagogy that is underneath that. The pedagogy that's underneath that is me sitting down with a brush bot, and after Miss Greening told me not to glue the wire to the electrode, I glued the wire to the electrode and learned what an insulator is. That the glue is an insulator and won't allow the wire and the electrode to communicate. I learned from my failure, okay? After she lectured me, all right? Our students need the opportunity to find a safe place to learn from their failures and to grow. That's what I see, and that's what I mean when I talk about innovation, is we need to get our students involved in those kinds of problem solving and project-based adventures. One great resource I want to give to you is a book called Mindset, okay, Mindset by Carol Dweck, and it talks about the growth mindset. If we can help our students learn that when they face a problem, they're not dumb. When they face a challenge, they are just facing an opportunity to learn. If we can do that for ourselves too and model that for them, we will help them grow in ways that we can't even anticipate yet. So check out the website and the book Mindset, all right? And we'll begin to work together on innovating transformational learning experiences for our students. The other thing that I heard on my listening tour as I went around is that we need to be intentional and thoughtful about diversifying the Lake Highland family. One of the ways that I think about this is not as a statistical exercise, but as an educational one. Some of you have heard me say that one of the great conversations that we're having here at Lake Highland is exploring diversity as a precondition for learning. It's my belief that learning only takes place across gradients of diversity. And so you only learn when you encounter somebody who knows something, has experienced something differently than you have. And so we've got to intentionally encounter people who know and see the world differently than we do. Whether that's you have a master's in biology and I don't, or you're older than I am and you've seen things that I haven't, or you grew up in a different part of the country or a different part of the world, or you see things differently because of your experiences growing up than the way that I see things. There are elements of diversity throughout this community that we need to wake up to, be alive to, and mine for the educational value that's there. But there's also a lot of homogeneity in the Lake Highland family too that we can begin to actively try to grow. And that's starting with the Board of Trustees. The board is looking at its own makeup and beginning to set some targets in the future about how to bring people from different perspectives on to the board. We need to be thoughtful and intentional about that as we're recruiting faculty and staff, and we need to be thoughtful and intentional about that as we're looking for the very best students to come to Lake Highland to be part of our community. Toward that end, we've begun to work with a consultant who specializes in pre-K through 12 education that helps minority candidates find jobs at great schools like Lake Highland. And so that's one of the steps that we're taking, but there are other things that we can be more intentional about in terms of trying to purposefully bring into this community the very best trustees, the very best faculty and staff, the very best students and families who can enrich the learning environment with different perspectives and different experiences. And finally, the last area is engaging the emerging global challenges and opportunities that our students will have in their lifetimes that we can't yet anticipate. One of the other great conversations that we had this year was asking the community the question whether or not leadership development is one of the things that we do or the thing that we do. The consistent answer that we're getting is leadership development is the thing that we do. We have great programs. The North Carolina trip just got back. The 8th graders just got back. David Bernatavitz is still standing in the back over there. I think only one raft tipped over in the river. But we have Operation Odyssey about to come up. We have wonderful punctuated leadership development experiences throughout. But we can be more intentional about growing leaders over the course of their experience here at Lake Highland. The world needs good followers too, but good followers also know when they have what it takes to step up and be the leader. I think our sons and daughters are more often than not going to be thrust into situations in which they are going to have to lead. And they are going to have to know how to mine those capacities within them. But developing those leaders to engage the emerging global challenges and opportunities requires us to attend to the capacities that we've already discussed today. But also, even though we can't anticipate what the world will bring to them, we need to go ahead and do our best to guess what path our students will find themselves on. One of the most instructive books that I haven't read, I listened to lately, is Thank You for Being Late by Thomas Friedman. And I recommend this book to you because it distills down into 3 big trends, things that resonate with me, that I'm hearing from other sources about the path that we're on and the things that will continue to be important going forward. And it just gives a nice little model to put these things into neat categories to begin to think through how it is that we might prepare our students to develop. The first one he talks about is Moore's Law. Many of you are familiar with Moore's Law about the processing speed that information technology has, doubling and becoming more cheaper every 2 years. I think it's now down to 18 months or 16 months or something like that. But processing speed is increasing and becoming increasingly available, which means our students will have at their fingertips more information and disinformation than we could have ever imagined. They are not going to be able to be the encyclopedias that our parents wanted us to be. They are going to have to be the librarians, the curators of information in the future. They're going to have to know how to sift good information from bad information and how to use that information well. The second thing he talks about are markets. And he uses markets as a placeholder for globalization and the way that everything that we do will have ripple effects around the world. And everything that's happening around the world will have ripple effects on our lives. So even if you think about it in economic terms, they are going to be operating in a global marketplace. And that's true maybe nowhere else as much as it's true here in Orlando, as this southern city becomes a cosmopolitan, as this southern town becomes a cosmopolitan city with so many people from so many places around the world calling this place home. And we see how closely we are connected with people around the world. And the third area he says that we need to pay attention to is Mother Earth. So he's got Moore's Law, markets, and Mother Earth, and I've got Guide, all right? But Mother Earth, we've got to pay attention to what's happening with our environment and teach our students to understand, to know, to love, and care for creation, to be engaged with it. It's so easy now for us to be withdrawn and technologically savvy and forget to look up and see the woodpecker in the tree. We need to help our students get back in touch with nature and care for this world. And so he puts together a formula, I think, that we can begin to look together at. What's happening with technology and information processing, what's happening with globalization, and what's happening with environmental change. And I'm pleased to announce that to you, for the very first time, I haven't said this to anybody else yet, that next September, Thomas Friedman will be right here to talk about his book, Thank You for Being Late. And so we will have his inspiration, his model, as we launch 2 major planning processes next year. We'll be doing a strategic plan in the fall, which will dovetail into a master plan in the spring, and that will move into a plan for a campaign in the fall after that. And so all of us can't wait because, as I said earlier, we're constitutionally incapable of waiting. But I want us to be thoughtful, strategic, intentional, purposeful, and methodical as we unpack all of the potential that Lake Highland has and begin to translate that and move it into the future. And as we look forward to the 50th anniversary of Lake Highland's founding, I think we can also look back to those early days when we think about what has Lake Highland been here to do. What will be true about Lake Highland at its 50th anniversary, at its centennial, and at its bicentennial? And that is that you and I, our faculty, our staff, our students, and our alumni are stewards of an enduring purpose to transform this world, with leaders who love to learn and learn to love. Thank you. Do I have time for questions, or do we need to wrap up? Okay, so I would love to take some questions or comments or suggestions.
Dr. Rowe.
Yes.
So the guide model sounds very interesting and intriguing, and hopefully will transform this campus. What happens when they reach traditional college campuses who haven't yet transformed?
Thank you for asking that. Yeah, there's a lot, I can tell you from firsthand, there's a lot of college campuses that haven't transformed. And so it's interesting, interesting thing is happening. K-12 and higher ed are going through some of the same changes. What's not changing is this admissions threshold that we've got to get over, okay? Colleges have not changed the way that they're asking us to present ourselves in terms of admission, okay? So that's one of the reasons why we need to be thoughtful and careful and take small steps at a time to get across there. One of the things that's happening in higher ed, and I've participated in this when I was at Centenary, is in a national conversation that the American Association of Colleges and Universities is participating in, and that's focusing more on outcomes than inputs, okay? Focusing more on outcomes than inputs. That seems logical, and it seems like that's what we've always been doing, but it's not what we've always been doing. So let me give you an example. In colleges, accreditation standards, degree plans, everything else is denominated in what? It's denominated in time, okay? So is prison, okay? Time served, okay? What did you earn? I earned 3 hours, okay? Did you learn any biology? I earned 3 hours, okay? And so in colleges, we were denominating whether or not you had your rear end in a seat for the appropriate amount of hours to get through a course. Now, you do have grades, did you pass, fail, or whatever, but we weren't being really intentional about the learning outcomes that we were expecting to see across the board with students. We did have good learning outcomes by subject area, but we didn't know what it was in terms of critical thinking, in terms of intercultural understanding, in terms of problem solving, quantitative analysis. We just didn't have those things well articulated. The AAC&U has been working with colleges and universities for the last 7 or 8 years to write those rubrics down. So this is what we mean by critical thinking. It's no longer poetry on the brochure. This is how we measure it, okay? So colleges and universities are moving to this model, and I want us to translate our standards into AAC&U terms. We don't have to change anything. We just have to change the language we're using because we're already doing it. We just need to talk to the colleges in the same way that they're already measuring learning outcomes. And so that's one of the things that I want us to do. And then we need to figure out how to take these less measurable, more amorphous characteristics that we know make Lake Highland so valuable and translate them into something that an admission officer can look at in 90 seconds and evaluate, because that's all you got, all right? They're gonna look at that and, you know, most of the ones that they're looking at are not gonna get a longer look. And so we've got to distill it down. There's a consortium of independent schools that is beginning to work on a different type of transcript that actually can help us distill down into easy measures what the richness of the educational experience has been at a place like Lake Highland. And all of these schools are places like Lake Highland. And the person who got this started went to a couple of deans of admission around and said, if we changed our transcript, what would you do? And he said, I would put it aside. And he said, well, what if 100 schools like me changed our transcript? He said, I'll take a look at it. And so he's got a group of schools that are working together to experiment with different forms of transcripting so that we can try to measure these things that are going on. Until then, we need to step very carefully and interpret really thoroughly in college language what it is that we're doing here, and also do research on how our students are doing at various colleges and say, this is what Lake Highland, a 3.5 at Lake Highland means. This is what it means at Auburn. This is what it means at Elon. This is what it means at Princeton. We need to be able to say that. Yes?
Along that line of thinking, are you working with the deans to get their view and use them kind of as a think tank or a guiding body?
Our deans here are deans of admissions at schools.
At the university.
At the universities. So not yet. So that consortium is, and then I am individually kind of working my own network. So I'm starting this coming Friday or next Friday. Rollins, some of their senior team is coming over and they're going to tour Lake Highland, and then I'm going to go over and tour Rollins and just kind of begin conversations with folks that I know, and then also we can tap into this conversation and Grant Cornwell at Rollins was very instrumental in helping develop these AAC&U guidelines, the LEAP learning outcomes, and I think he can help us begin to translate this to colleges and universities. But yeah, we've got to either individually or collectively as a group walk with colleges and universities. And I feel like I've got about 18 months when I'm bilingual, and then I'm going to be all K-12. And I'm just now getting my K-12 language and feet underneath me, and I think there's a time here where I can help translate to both worlds. Yes.
You talked about customization, and I find that an exciting
Yeah.
opportunity. Can you give a little more information on maybe some of the ideas that you all are considering to implement that?
Well, I think the first step is to go ahead and try to understand and document what we're already doing. So I do think that our faculty and staff are really doing that intuitively and instinctively as we speak. And so that they're helping each student think through what their pathway is. I do think our counseling staff particularly already do a good job. I think ALL does a good job. I think Edison does a terrific job of helping students put together personalized learning plans. And I think that each of our students could benefit from that, whether you're a really high achieving student or one that finds some of the academic work more challenging, or a student who just is good at everything. You know, I love baseball and I love science, and you know, how do you get all that together? And so I think we have to be more intentional and engaging with the students up front and helping them think through their customized learning plans. And for the younger ones, and I think we have to start young, the parents have to be engaged, which means that we, and now I'm not president, I'm parent, we have to check out a little bit and allow our students' potential to show through there and to find their customization that they need that may be different than what we want them to need. And we have to kind of open that up a little bit and begin to work with the counselors and the faculty and have collective wisdom about how we're guiding our students through. I don't have any specific programmatic things to share with you, but I do think we are already doing that. Much of what I'm talking about is just being more intentional and purposeful and explicit about what we're doing and just continuing that.
So I know that Lake Highland has a good virtual learning program.
Yeah.
So are we growing it? Are we changing it to kind of address your desire to grow us culturally, organically, internationally?
So we have a great consortium called the Global Online Academy that we work with. And the Global Online Academy is a group of schools that are very much like Lake Highland that are designing curriculum for each other. And a number of our students are taking courses on the Global Online Academy, not as many as we would like, but there are students who are taking advantage of it. I think this year we had, Mike, how many hundreds of students in English doing fake news? We had about 400 of our students did a 2-week course on the Global Online Academy on fake news and through all of our English classes. And so they at least got exposure to online education. And so I think there's a couple of things that we need to be thinking about there. One is that our students will encounter online education going forward, no matter what we think about it, okay? So they need to be adept at being able to use electronic tools for learning. The second thing is we can enrich the offerings that we have for our students by taking advantage of expertise elsewhere and making it accessible to our students. And we can help the educational offerings elsewhere by taking our expertise and making it available to other folks. There's some other things that we can do. We have students who are gone for illness or for elite sports or who are out for one reason or another for an extended period of time. If some of those learning opportunities were also online, then it wouldn't necessarily be a setback for students if they weren't able to be physically in the classroom at that particular time. So that's one of the things that we need to look at. I think most of us still prefer the personal in-class flesh and blood experience with a teacher who's going to walk you through, but I think we need to be open to the fact that technology is going to be transforming the face of learning, and we need to figure out what it is that we can do to help make sure that to the extent that that influences what we do here, that it does add to these transformational learning experiences and not take away from it. Well, thank you all very much for being here. I said at the beginning of the year, I've fallen in love with you. I've fallen in love with you, and I've fallen in love with Lake Highland. And as we continue to work together, I look forward to the ways that our love for each other, our love for Lake Highland, but most of all, our love for our sons and daughters will continue to help this place flourish. Have a great day.